According to a leaked report, Russia's military intelligence directorate has engaged in a campaign of sabotage and subterfuge across Europe. Just what does this mean for the European allies of Ukraine, and why would Russia play so close to the edge? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is coming to us from the New York Times. According to leaked reports from a U.S. and allied intelligence officials, Russia, and particularly the GRU, Russia's elite military intelligence wing, has been engaged in what they call low-level sabotage operations in Europe. But they say it's part of a Russian campaign to undermine support for Ukraine's war effort, right? These covert operations have been mostly arsons or attempted arsons in a bizarrely wide range of sites, right? Including a warehouse in England, a paint factory in Poland, homes in Latvia, and most oddly, an IKEA store in Lithuania. And the reason is pretty simple, right? The American and European security officials say this is part of Russia's efforts first to slow arms transfers to Kiev, which undoubtedly by targeting some of these sites with arson, it's not necessarily that they're going to damage the sites so much that they disrupt the aid flow. The idea is to make it more costly to secure the entire aid pipeline, right? So if you sit there and go, hey, from factory to warehouse to railhead to Lviv, these sites now need to be guarded and secured against attacks. It's going to increase the total cost. It's also going to make it logistically tougher. Just like any other guerrilla strategy, just like Ukraine's strategy with the Freedom of Russia Legion in Belgorod to re-divert resources from elsewhere in the front, that's kind of the intent here. But the more nefarious intent is to create the appearance of growing European opposition to support for Ukraine. And this, I think, is even more interesting because we know that aligns with Russia's larger three-pronged strategic goal on the battlefield, right? They have their goal on the front line to actually attrit Ukrainian forces and remain on the offensive. They have the goal of isolating Ukraine diplomatically, right? Making it harder for them to make deals with the governments of their allies and to reduce the Western public's desire and support for Ukrainian aid. And this serves the second two objectives, particularly the third, right? Because oftentimes protesters and protest actions, particularly ones that are violent or spectacle, they will receive disproportionate news coverage. Again, a fire in an empty warehouse wouldn't make the news in most American cities, right? They'd say the warehouse fire is a unfortunate but routine occurrence. But if they say that warehouse fire was set deliberately as an act of protest, it's going to get a lot more coverage, and that's going to make it appear that there is a larger, more widespread, more militant opposition to Ukraine aid. And Russia and the GRU, they're very good at what they do, right? Don't confuse the fact that the average Russian conscript is a poorly trained, I don't want to say a fool, but a poorly trained sucker, with the fact that Russia doesn't have some troops that are highly, highly capable. And the GRU is definitely one of them. Right. So much so that, again, the Prime Minister of Estonia called it a shadow war. And the Prime Minister of Norway said Russia was posing a real and serious threat. But what I thought was most interesting is, of course, the GRU, while backing these kind of plans, actually primarily recruit heavily from citizens of that country. Again, this way, when these fall guys or patsies are arrested, it appears to be local homegrown citizens that are doing these things, and not, in fact, a foreign intelligence agency operating in Western Europe. Right. What's fascinating is that U.S. and European allies said that Russia was treading somewhat carefully with its sabotage plans. It wants to draw attention to the fires, but not so much that the intelligence agencies are going to come out and directly blame them. And of course, before the war, United States and Ukraine, right, were declassifying and exposing the GRU plans to create a pretext for the invasion. And that the overall intelligence, again, as they point out, Russia's plan, right, to weaken European resolve. And I think what is most troubling about this is that it is reflective of kind of the Western hand wringing, where we go, oh, we can't have boots on the ground. We have to be very careful to not escalate this. Meanwhile, Russia is actively engaging in a sabotage campaign. Remember, these aid flows are run by the Ministry of Defense of their respective countries. And that's who's being targeted here. So Russia's already targeting the Ministry of Defense facilities associated with these countries in Western Europe. So Russia doesn't have boots on the ground qualms, right? And they've correctly identified that European countries are constantly going to take kind of the milquetoast, middle of the road, non-committal strategy, right? They default to doing nothing. And when you have this kind of policy of doing nothing, it's going to embolden Russia further, right? And what I also want to point out is if the GRU is willing to go into these countries, recruit local nationals, and stage fires and other sabotage incidents, do you think that there aren't also GRU agents on the internet, right? Buying ads, promoting or encouraging or sharing narratives. We know Russia has access to large language models commercially. So they almost certainly are going to also have those large language models accessible by their military, right? Their military almost certainly has more powerful, more effective large language models. So using those, right, you could see how they could inundate comment sections with anti-Ukraine comments. They could inundate a politician with emails purporting to be from local constituents expressing reluctance to aid Ukraine. So I think that what you see is just the tip of the iceberg here. But that doesn't mean that Europe is slowing down. But before we talk about that real quick, I want to talk to you guys. Combat Vet News, new video dropping today of the fighting on the front line. So if you're interested in checking it out, right, you can become a member. Any one of these tiers is going to get you access. But of course, if you want to support the channel, support what I do even more, Lieutenant tier or the Colonel tier, you get the shout outs at the end of every video. So I appreciate you guys. And we're going to be revamping the site coming up here, and we're going to be adding some more perks for Colonel and Lieutenant tiers. So definitely want to get in now on the ground floor. Okay. So luckily, these sabotage campaigns, right, like a lot of Russian effort, is actually not that great. Kiev, for example, says France actually wants to send military trainers to Ukraine. French military instructors may visit Ukrainian training centers soon. But the France's defense ministry shied away from confirming these comments. And I think that is really interesting because usually Ukraine might have outed this because it has an incentive, right? Each side is talking their book. Ukraine wants to project strength, especially vis-a-vis Russia. And by saying, hey, France is such a committed ally that they're going to have boots on the ground here, Russia's going to go, damn, it might be a dangerous escalation for us to target, for example, Ukrainian training sites. In contrast, the French, who want to maintain strategic ambiguity, that's been one of their policies for months, France is saying, hey, listen, while there's no guarantee that this will happen. We're still in discussions about what this is going to look like. The issue's being studied, but we can't confirm deployment. Quote, as they've said, as mentioned several times, training on Ukrainian soil is one of the projects discussed since the conference in late February. But the track needs to be subject of work with Ukrainians, particularly to figure out their exact needs. And as we've pointed out, most countries have figured out it is much easier to bring Ukrainian troops to Western training sites than it is to have Western trainers go to Ukrainian sites, right? It's just politically less fraught, and Western countries have existing training infrastructure that Ukrainians can train on. Now, we also have Belgium, one of the least functional Western European countries, has even pulled itself together to provide $1 billion in military aid and 30 F-16s, which I understand F-16s not exactly game changers on the battlefield, but Belgium happy. Any aid is helpful, right? And notice it's the and. right? €1 billion in military aid and 30 F-16 fighters. And this is part of a 10-year, a decade-long bilateral security agreement. So a real sign of deepening ties. And as we've talked about, that Europe is here for the long run. And this is, again, a signal to Russia that the Europeans, Western European allies, are here to support Ukraine for the long term, right? And let's see if we can find this here. Let's see. I want to see if I can get the economy size here. Okay, this is not that helpful. This is an absolutely unreadable chart. But here's a Russia to Belgium GDP per capita chart. And you can see that Belgium is about, a quarter of the Russian government's annual total GDP, right? You can see, obviously, Belgium, a much more productive country, $50,000 per person. But you see that it's about a quarter of Russia. And that's pretty scary for someone like Russia, who's depending on winning the war with an economy, right? With their larger economy. When, a small sort of big player like Belgium pledges this much money to aid Ukraine, it's a sign that Russia, especially over a decade, it's a sign that Russia definitely has stuff to worry about, right? The other deal announced at the same time, Ukraine and Spain signing a $1 billion bilateral security deal. And that's going to be $1 billion this year. Right? But it's going to continue up to 2027. Ukraine will be getting 5 billion euros from Spain through the European Peace Fund, right? And this is, again, a sign that while Russia wants to try to weaken the cooperation among these allies, the allies are sticking their stake in the ground. They're saying, listen, we're not going anywhere. We're signing these 3, 4, 5, 6, 10-year agreements that clearly signal to Russia that they have to be in this for the long haul. And Russia may not be able to afford it. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Be sure to check us out on Combat Vet News. Thanks to our Colonel tier members. Thanks to our Lieutenant tier members. I could not do this without you guys. I appreciate you so much. And I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.